The Pentagon has war-gamed losing Greenland more times than they'll publicly admit, and what they discovered should terrify anyone who cares about global security. You probably think Greenland is just ice, right? Some frozen wasteland nobody really cares about except for climate scientists and confused Vikings. But here's what they're not telling you. Greenland isn't just strategically important. It's the single most valuable piece of real estate on planet Earth that nobody wants you to understand. And if the United States ever lost control of it, the entire global balance of power would collapse in ways most people can't even imagine. By the end of this video, you'll never look at a map the same way again. Let me show you something that'll blow your mind. If you look at Greenland on most world maps, it appears roughly the same size as Africa. But Africa is actually 14 times larger than Greenland. 14 times! The Mercator projection makes Greenland look massive because of how it distorts areas near the poles. But this visual trick has hidden one of the most important strategic realities of modern warfare right in plain sight. While everyone's been staring at Greenland's distorted size, they've completely missed what makes it genuinely terrifying from a military perspective. And it has nothing to do with how big it looks. Greenland sits at the exact point where three massive oceans meet. It's positioned like a cork in a bottle, right at the throat of the shortest route between North America and Europe. Every submarine, every aircraft, every missile that wants to cross between the eastern and western hemispheres through the Arctic has to pass within striking distance of Greenland. But here's where it gets absolutely wild. Greenland hosts one of the most sophisticated early warning radar systems ever built. Thule Air Base, located just 750 miles from the North Pole, can detect incoming ballistic missiles from literally thousands of miles away. And in a moment, you'll see why losing this capability would create a blind spot so catastrophic that military strategists call it the nightmare scenario. Built in 1951, Thule operates in conditions so extreme that supplies can only arrive by ship for about 6 weeks per year. Temperatures regularly drop to minus 40 degrees. Winds hit hurricane force. The sun doesn't rise for months. Yet this frozen outpost, with its massive radomes protecting radar arrays, quietly watches the skies 24 hours a day. American military personnel stationed there joke that they're closer to Moscow than to Miami. And they're not exaggerating. What most people don't realize is that Greenland has been militarily significant since the Second World War. When Nazi Germany occupied Denmark in 1940, Greenland became a strategic orphan. The United States stepped in, establishing weather stations and airfields critical for Allied operations. Those weather reports from Greenland helped predict the conditions for D-Day. The airfields allowed planes to ferry across the Atlantic when most aircraft couldn't make the journey otherwise. Greenland wasn't just helpful, it was essential. Fast forward to the Cold War, and Greenland transformed into something even more critical. The shortest route for Soviet bombers and missiles to reach American cities went right over the Arctic, directly past Greenland. Thule became America's first line of defense. And here's the part that should make your stomach drop. That's still true today. If anything, it's become more important as new players enter the game. Because here's what changed everything: climate change. Forget the polar bears for a second and think about what happens when the Arctic Ocean becomes navigable. For most of human history, the Arctic was a frozen barrier that naturally separated the great powers. But now, scientists estimate that within just a few decades, ships will be able to cross the Arctic Ocean during summer months. New shipping routes will slash weeks-off journeys between Asia and Europe. And suddenly, Greenland goes from being a static defensive position to sitting right in the middle of the world's newest, most contested maritime highway. And that's exactly when things get dangerous. Russia has reopened Soviet-era military bases along their Arctic coastline. They've built more icebreakers than any other nation. China, despite being nowhere near the Arctic Circle, declared itself a near-Arctic state and has invested billions in polar research. Both nations understand what the Pentagon understands. Whoever controls the Arctic controls the future. And Greenland is the linchpin. Now, here's where it gets even more insane. Beneath Greenland's ice sheet, beneath that glacial covering up to 2 miles thick in places, geologists have discovered something that changes everything. Rare earth elements. Massive deposits of minerals absolutely critical for modern technology. Elements needed for smartphones, electric vehicles, wind turbines, advanced weapon systems, basically everything that powers modern civilization. China currently controls roughly 70% of the world's rare earth supply. But Greenland's deposits could rival or exceed China's reserves. Imagine this. If a rival power gained influence over Greenland, they wouldn't just get strategic military positioning. They'd get control over resources that could determine technological dominance for the next century. They could dictate terms for everything from consumer electronics to missile guidance systems. And it gets worse. Greenland isn't actually an independent nation making its own decisions. It's an autonomous territory of Denmark. Denmark, a NATO ally, yes, but also a small nation of fewer than 6 million people. Greenland itself has a population of only about 56,000. 56,000 people sitting on top of strategic real estate worth potentially trillions of dollars. The capital, Nuuk, has roughly 19,000 residents. That's smaller than most American suburbs. Do you see the vulnerability? The raw asymmetry of power? In 2019, President Trump inquired about purchasing Greenland from Denmark. The Danish Prime Minister called the idea absurd. But here's what most coverage missed. The United States has tried to buy Greenland before. In 1946, the Truman administration offered Denmark $100 million for the territory. Denmark declined. The fact that American leadership keeps returning to this idea tells you everything about how seriously the Pentagon takes Greenland's importance. Because the nightmare scenario isn't about losing Greenland to military conquest. That's not how modern geopolitics works. The nightmare is about losing influence gradually. It's about economic dependence. It's about a rival power offering infrastructure deals that Denmark or Greenland's government find too attractive to refuse. China has already tried this playbook elsewhere. They offer to build airports, ports, telecommunications networks. They provide loans that seem generous. Then, when payments become difficult, they convert debt into long-term leases or operational control. It's happening in Africa, in Southeast Asia, in the Pacific Islands. And it's already started in Greenland. In 2018, Chinese companies expressed interest in building airports there. Denmark and the United States quickly moved to block those plans, with Denmark ultimately financing the airports themselves to keep Chinese influence out. But that was just one battle. The pressure isn't going away. Think about what Greenland's local population faces. They live in one of the harshest climates on Earth. Unemployment runs high. Infrastructure is limited. Most settlements can't be reached by road, only by boat or aircraft. The cost of living is astronomical because everything has to be imported. When someone offers to build modern infrastructure, to create jobs, to connect isolated communities, that's not some abstract geopolitical chess move. That's a genuine improvement in daily life. The tension between local needs and global strategic concerns creates exactly the opening that sophisticated powers know how to exploit. Military planners operate on something called the OODA loop. Observe, orient, decide, act. The faster you complete this cycle compared to your adversary, the more likely you are to win. Greenland's early warning systems, its radar installations, its strategic position, all of this collapses the observation phase for the United States. American forces get crucial extra minutes or hours of warning time that could mean the difference between intercepting a threat and watching it reach its target. If a rival power gained basing rights in Greenland, even limited ones, they'd flip this advantage. The balance of power shifts fundamentally. Modern warfare increasingly depends on satellites, on cyber capabilities, on electronic warfare. Greenland's position makes it ideal for ground stations that communicate with polar orbiting satellites. It's perfect for facilities that can jam or intercept communications. In an era where information dominance matters as much as firepower, Greenland represents information high ground. But here's something most people miss. The people of Greenland have their own feelings about all this. Greenlandic culture has survived centuries of colonialism, first under Norwegian rule, then Danish control. The indigenous Inuit population has maintained their language, their traditions, their connection to the land despite repeated attempts at cultural erasure. In recent decades, Greenland has gained increasing autonomy. There's a growing independence movement. Some Greenlanders dream of full sovereignty. But here's the cruel irony. True independence might make Greenland even more vulnerable. A nation of 56,000 people cannot defend itself against great power pressure. It cannot afford the military infrastructure needed to protect such strategically vital territory. Independence might actually make it easier for rival powers to gain influence. It's a trap. Remain dependent and give up self-determination. Seek independence and risk becoming a pawn in conflicts you can't control. The ice itself is becoming a player. Greenland's ice sheet is melting at accelerating rates. When ice melts, it exposes new coastline, new areas that can be developed, new resources that can be accessed. The Northwest Passage and the Northeast Passage, Arctic sea routes that have been impassable for centuries, are becoming seasonal realities. Ships that used to spend weeks going through the Suez Canal can now cut straight through the Arctic during summer. And Greenland sits right at the intersection of these new routes. Military strategists talk about choke points, locations so strategically vital that controlling them gives you leverage over entire regions. The Strait of Hormuz controls Persian Gulf oil. The Strait of Malacca controls shipping between the Indian and Pacific Oceans. Greenland is becoming the Arctic choke point. And unlike narrow straits, Greenland offers something even more valuable: space. Room for bases, for infrastructure, for positioning forces that can project power in multiple directions. Now, if you're enjoying these deep dives into maps and hidden geography that shape global power, consider subscribing. So what happens if the United States actually loses influence over Greenland? Imagine China or Russia gains significant economic leverage through infrastructure investment. They don't need military bases immediately. They just need access. Access to ports for research vessels. Access to airstrips for polar aircraft. Access to mineral rights for mining companies. Each small concession seems reasonable in isolation, but together they create facts on the ground that become very difficult to reverse. Within a decade, you have foreign nationals operating critical facilities, foreign ships in Greenlandic waters, foreign interests deeply embedded in local economy. Or picture this: Greenland achieves independence during a period of distraction. Maybe America is dealing with a crisis elsewhere. In the chaos of new nation building, Greenland desperately needs capital and partnerships. Well-prepared rival powers offer everything needed. 10 years later, NATO doesn't have guaranteed access anymore. Thule Air Base's lease comes up for renewal, and suddenly there are conditions that make continued operation difficult. The strategic blind spot opens. Or consider the climate scenario. Arctic ice melts faster than predicted. New resources become accessible sooner than expected. Multiple powers rush in simultaneously. Greenland lacks capacity to manage this attention. Rival bases get established under scientific or commercial pretexts. Before anyone realizes what's happened, the Arctic has become contested space with Greenland as the prize everyone's fighting over. Each scenario leads to the same endpoint. The United States loses its early warning capability, loses Arctic choke point control, loses access to critical rare earth elements, loses the ability to monitor and respond to threats from the north. The entire defensive posture of North America gets compromised. And once lost, these positions are nearly impossible to recover. The Pentagon knows this. Denmark knows this. Russia and China definitely know this. The only people who might not understand the stakes are the general public. We've been conditioned to think of Greenland, if we think of it at all, as irrelevant, as empty, as nothing more than a frozen footnote. But that's exactly the kind of blindness that lets strategic disasters happen. Here's the bottom line. Greenland is not just ice. It's the future of Arctic power projection. It's early warning systems that protect hundreds of millions of people. It's rare Earth elements that determine technological leadership. It's maritime choke points that control global trade routes. It's information high ground in modern warfare. And it's all defended by a population smaller than a mid-sized town, governed by a small European nation, coveted by the world's largest powers. The asymmetry is terrifying. The stakes are existential. And the window to secure long-term American influence is closing faster than the ice itself. So now you know why the Pentagon has nightmares about Greenland, why military planners keep running scenarios, why economic and diplomatic efforts focus so intensely on this frozen island most people can't even find on a map. Because in the game of global power, Greenland isn't a pawn. It's the queen. And losing the queen means losing the game. If this video changed how you see strategic geography, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what surprised you most about Greenland's importance. Would you ever consider living there knowing how critical it is to global security? And check the description for links to more deep dives on how maps and geography secretly control world politics. Because once you start seeing the real strategic picture, you can't unsee it. And Greenland is just the beginning.